Hello to the viewers at home. Thank you for staying with us here at Viet Film Fest 2025. You have just seen and finished Let This Acceptance Take. I also wanted to say hello to any student viewers out there who may be watching this Q&A today. I am joined now here by 4 of the filmmakers for the short film set that you just watched, and I would like them to please introduce themselves now, beginning with Alice.
Hi, my name is Alice, and I'm the director of Someone Special, which is my graduation film, and it's also like animated. So yeah, I hope you like the film.
Hi, my name is Pipu Phương Nguyễn. I'm a Vietnamese film director living in Paris, and I directed the film The Boy Who Cheated Death. I hope you liked it as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Quinn Whitnley, director and producer of the documentary Threads about the Montagnard community in North Carolina. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Anne. I am the director and writer of Through the Wire, the film about the gamer girl meeting with her online bestie in real life.
All right. Thank you, folks, for being here today. I wanted to get started with the first group question, and that is noting the theme of this set: acceptance of self, acceptance of others, the cultures we inherit. How do you see your film fitting in with the theme of this set? Again, beginning with Alice.
I think my film fits this theme because the whole film is about acceptance. For my main character, it's both accepting her Viet heritage and how she wants to reconnect with it, and maybe she used the date as an excuse to learn it, like, oh, it's just for the date, when inside, like, she needed to accept something about herself, that it's also because it matters to her. So this, and also accepting that she's not fully Vietnamese, and that she has 2 cultures, and that it's normal that she struggles and that it takes time, basically. Yeah.
On my side, I see the theme. It explores like what it means to live and to carry truth. And for that, I see my character. He has to navigate his own understanding of life and death, which is something very difficult for a little child. But he does it with imagination, with compassion, and even if sometimes it's childish, it's for me, it's a journey, that the journey of acceptance. And in that sense, for me, the word acceptance is not passive. It's an active process to understand and to heal.
Yeah, just sort of beginning where Alice and Pipu ended. I think the first thing I think of when I think of acceptance in regards to this film is the idea of refugee acceptance, kind of, and thinking about it in terms of government, right? That the United States, quote unquote, accepted refugees after the wars in Southeast Asia, and what this relationship feels like, right? So when I think of the whole term, let this acceptance take, it almost feels passive, right? Like it feels like there's this narrative that refugees sort of have to accept what happened and sort of make do with what has been sort of out of our hands or out of their hands. Um, and so in this film, I think that's sort of what we explore, is like the kind of quiet power that people do within their community that people maybe from the outside don't even know is happening. And that's kind of the I think the quiet power of both accepting one's fate, but also making a new life and sort of making their own lives in spite of that. So that's what I think about when I think about acceptance. It's sort of a double-edged sword, I guess, of both positive but a sort of sad kind of undertone to it.
Yeah, so in regards to the theme of acceptance, I feel like my protagonist kind of spent the first half of the movie kind of rejecting the quote unquote like normie culture, like nuclear family and like dating culture. But in the end, I feel like the acceptance kind of came from the universality that like everyone need connection. And I feel like she going to meet with her friend ultimately is all about meeting another person that can share this space, this emotional space with you. And I feel like by the end, both of them come to accept that yes, despite our difference from, quote unquote, the normal people or anyone else, we're able to carve out a space physically and metaphorically or whatever for people like us where we can be our true self without any judgment. So yeah.
Thank you all. A note about the title of the short film set. It comes from the end of Henry V when the chorus comes out and references their prologue. Acceptance, we think of accept as a verb, but in this case it comes as a noun. The ambiguity of the title was purposeful. How do we see acceptance in, again, various contexts, various forms? I thank you all for responding. I wanted to ask now, in what ways did your understanding of your own Vietnamese identity help inform your films?
I think it was like the base of my film, to be honest, because I did question myself a lot before making the film and also during and after. And for me to understand that I'm quite far away from my Vietnamese identity because I come from, I'm like second or third generation of immigration. So it's like my grandparents immigrated here and then the language basically like got lost and I can't speak it at all and my mom can only speak it a little bit and so it it decreased and I really wanted to talk about this in my film and in this situation my character is in the exact same situation as me but I wanted to explore a side of me trying to reconnect through a character and not through my exact self. I wanted to put some fiction in it. But yeah, I think then making the film made me really connect with what I wanted to tell, like what experience, and then where I wanted to go after, like in terms of learning and reconnecting and making community with other people. Yeah.
In response to what Alice just said, I'm reminded that the other day I listened to a podcast of the Vietnamese diplomat Tôn Nữ Thị Ninh. She was she moved to France when she was 3 years old, and she grew up speaking French and only speaking Vietnamese because of her mom. But then later in her life, she came back to Vietnam, and she had a very long career being a Vietnamese diplomat. And the podcast, maybe I will send you a link later, talked a lot about the importance of the sense of belonging. And I think it speaks a lot to us as Vietnamese who lives outside of Vietnam. And to come back on Eric's question, for me, well, I heard the writer Viet Thanh Nguyen say one time that he wants to write the Vietnamese story unapologetically. And so it also inspires me to make Vietnamese films unapologetically, because before, sometimes I wrote my films thinking that I have to explain myself before I even make it. And so I put a lot of like symbolism, and I try to over explain the Vietnamese side of the story, and it just doesn't work. It's just not like authentic in the end. So for this film, even though it is set on many places on Earth, so in England for the human characters, and in many other locations in the wilderness for the animal characters, to me this film is still deeply Vietnamese, because it is rooted in the belief that death is not an ending but a continuation, because Vietnamese people believe in reincarnation and the idea that our loved ones may return in the form of another living being. I remember in my grandfather's death anniversary in Vietnam, my grandma pointed as like this big, gorgeous black butterfly, and she said that, "Oh yeah, it's your granddad. He returns every year. He wants to check out his grandchildren." And I see that belief is shared by many other Asian cultures as well. And so this is a belief that streamlined the whole story of the film. Of course, there is also one particular scene in the film, is that the scene of the American-Vietnamese War that was inspired personally by the My Lai massacre, which for this scene, I decided to make this scene after watching the documentary of my favorite Vietnamese documentary filmmaker, Trần Văn Thủy. It is called The Sound of Violin in My Lai. It is about an American veteran who came back to the My Lai village to play violin for the 500 villagers that were murdered there. And of course, the film speaks about something horrible that happened, but being Vietnamese, it also speaks about how we can carry the pain, and at the same time we can heal, and we can try to be friends, try to reconcile.
Quinn?
I'm just thinking about everything that's being said. I'm like, so important, this conversation, and I feel like very seen and sort of like in community with people who are thinking about some of the same things as me, which is, a great thing about Viet Film Fest. I think, for me, as a queer person, culture has always been sort of ambivalent. We're talking about ambiguous in terms of belonging and not belonging, and who gets to speak on behalf of the culture. I think especially when you grow up outside of Vietnam in the diaspora, especially for me with parents who are both refugees and my grandparents both passed in the war, there's sort of like this understanding of history that you're disconnected from, and sort of for students who, are also from immigrant and refugee backgrounds, I think that's something that I've heard a lot of people experience of, like, your bridge to your culture comes through your family. And so you sort of take what your family says as like the main, like real knowledge of the culture, right? And I think sometimes like zooming out and thinking of your parents or your grandparents or your family as just like one member of the larger community of the culture helps. And I think that's sort of how I've approached thinking about my identity, to kind of think about it as bigger than my family. And so some, people can disagree about what things are and what aren't. This is like a long-winded way to kind of like bring it back to the way that I think about making documentary, because it's a fun mission to do documentary, because you don't know what you're gonna get. You think you know, and I always think I know. So you can plan for it and do all the logistical things. But I think something about documentary that I really love is that you sort of take your understanding of maybe how culture works, and you can really follow people lead in where they want to take the story. I don't know, this is like a winding way into the conversation about just as a Vietnamese person. I think I take so early in my life, I felt so disconnected from being Vietnamese because of maybe like a separation from my family, but then kind of learning how to be Vietnamese through my own queer community, I think really informs the way that I do films, even though the films themselves might not be about queer folks, that it has a sort of point of view that the culture is not a monolith and there are different voices within any culture, and sometimes they can disagree with each other, but that's what makes it more rich.
And
Hi. So sorry. So I feel like Through the Wire is kind of my first foray into narrative filmmaking. And for me, when I was making it, I wasn't thinking like, oh, like, how is this gonna be a Vietnamese film or not? I was just thinking about my first love. I immigrated at like 13 from Saigon. So I feel like my memory is still really fresh. And I was just kind of like thinking about what inspired me, all the arts, all the media, everything that I love as a kid, and kind of like drawing inspiration from that time of my life, being adolescent in Vietnam, and just kind of like going about the city and all the emotion that came with like being an angsty teen. So I feel like in that way, just like what people said, I feel like Vietnamese, of course, my film is inspired by my Vietnamese identity because it's my time living there. I'm a Vietnamese person. It's only natural that the landscape, the people, the culture, even, for example, the video game that I try to recreate in my film was based on an actual video game that was really big in Vietnam and kind of Southeast Asia and East Asia at the time, called Audition. Like everyone was playing it. So I feel like I'm trying to take a nod back to my culture of like, hey, like, remember when we were like kind of all playing this game in like 2006, 2007? So I feel like it's indistinguishably Vietnamese in that sense because it literally capture kind of a slice of it's like a time capsule basically of the late 2000, what it's like to be an angsty teenager living in Vietnam.
thank you, Anne. Thank you, everybody, for answering that question. I wanted to note that two of our filmmakers here made the animated films that you just saw. There was a special record that was set at Viet Film Fest 2025 this year, and that we had 10 accepted films that were animated short films. That beat our previous record by 4, which was set last year. So a full 1/6 of all films at Viet Film Fest were animated shorts. And to both our French animators, Alice and Pipo, I wanted to ask you, what animated works most influenced the animation styles for your respective films?
For me, I'm very inspired by cartoons in general, both Asian and like more European animation, and also American as well. So one film that really inspired me just before making mine was Turning Red by Domi Shi, because even though it's 3D and I do 2D animation, she was herself very inspired by a 90s anime such as Sailor Moon and other magical girls and school stories. And so how she embodied all of that inspiration from 2D anime from the 90s into more modern cartoonish like 3D was really like interesting to me. And even like the expressions and emotion of the character are very exaggerated, which I also tried to do in my film. And yeah, just how she managed to bring comedy to a story about immigration and about the link with your cultural traditions and family while being like a young immigrant kid was really like talk to me, and both in style and in how she did the story. And then I'm pretty much inspired by also the animation that I saw as a kid, and I still watch like French animation. And yeah, I think just a lot of cartoon, definitely. Yeah, and anime.
Well, as for me, because I did the Gobelin in Paris, so during this time I was very influenced by all the Gobelin films and the way that 2D animation is taught and made here. And it's very proper for me. It's like it is a lot of craft, and I absolutely adore it. But I also want to break out of this process and to find new ways to create an image, because I think that with animation there are so many different ways you can compose an image that I think sometimes when I look at experimental animation, I feel like we are just barely scratching the surface, and I'm very inspired by that. I watch Vietnamese silk paintings and lacquers and all of this, and I always think that, oh, one day I would be able to bring these texture materials to animation and make it. So when I approach a project, a personal one such as The Boy Cheated Death, who that ask a compile of different styles, I do look for the kind of animation or the kind of animators that use also a versatile palette of different styles. And I find that in Nick Cross, who is the art director of Over the Garden Wall. He made a very short film called Leviathan, and it's only 1 minute and a half something, but it's very mesmerizing, and I really love the way that it's just one scene, it's like one tableau, but it just takes us from one word to another. And I was very inspired by that. I was also inspired by the work of Gerald Scarfe for Pink Floyd's The Wall, or by my two favorite patchwork animators, Terry Gilliam and Misha Gondry. It's just basically the people, the directors, the storytellers who just use whatever they have.
Well, thank you both. I definitely saw the Turning Red influence. I am surprised to hear that Over the Garden Wall has found an audience in Europe, because it's so rooted in American Gothic fiction. So I'm glad to hear. I've heard both of your influences. We're going to move into individualized questions now. I'm going to go in reverse order. So we're going to begin with Anne. Anne, you spoke about finding friendship in viral spaces earlier. And I think a lot of younger people, and I do include myself in this one, have made friends through communities online, message boards, gaming, other spaces. Do you see that as a potential remedy to loneliness? And how can these friendships be built in a safe, healthy way? And you are muted.
Hello.
And yes, hello.
Hi, can you hear me now? Sorry, I unmuted the mic, but I wasn't sure. Yeah, hi. What I'm trying to say, yes, I feel like, which is kind of funny, because the period when I was trying to capture in my film, I feel it was more bizarre to go to meet with someone that you know from the internet. But I think now increasingly more and more, I think the line between like what is the ether, what is the internet, and what is real life have been like slowly been blurred. And I feel like the internet is such an amazing is ultimately is like a tool, like a space, right, where you can like meet people. So I feel like it is a totally valid space to make friends and find connection, especially for people who are in really small town who they have no one that have the same interests as them, or people who feel otherwise very like other different than their immediate environment. Yeah. And sorry, what was the second part of the questions?
The other part of the question was, how can young people build these friendships in a safe and healthy way?
I feel like it's honestly really hard to say because I feel like it's just the luck of the draw, really. I feel like I have kind of like unrestricted access mental from a really early age, and that definitely like did something to my brain. But I also feel like I'm very grateful for it, and I'm very happy that I didn't fall in with the wrong crowd, the wrong ideology. But I feel like it's so hard to, I think, to ultimately it's come down to whether or not you have a strong support system in real life, right? Because I feel like it's really easy to go down to X, Y, and Z pipeline, but it's like really bad extremists. But I think ultimately it just come down to you having more experience and just like the the wisdom of age and the discernment, really. Because I feel like I honestly like don't even know how certain people come out unscathed. Yeah, so sorry.
I mean, gaming is an interesting space right now that I don't think really has been explored in even the short film form, from what I have seen, and how friendships develop, whether healthily or unhealthily. So I wanted to credit you for looking into a space that has largely been unexplored from what I have seen so far. So thank you, Anne. Quinn, we've spoken a little bit about Threads and the anthology that it is a part of. Can you speak a little bit about that planned documentary anthology that your film is part of?
Yeah. So Threads is a part of a 5-part docuseries that I'm producing, and I directed 3 of the episodes, including Threads, and one of the episodes is actually directed by Won Ying-win, whose film is also in this block. But it came sort of last year as a effort, I think, to kind of think about how to commemorate this year, 2025, as 50 years since 1975, which is the year Americans officially withdrew from Vietnam, the year that the war in Laos technically ended. It's also the beginning of the genocide in Cambodia at the hands of the Khmer Rouge. So I think it's like a complex sort of year that like maybe needed unpacking. But for us in the Vietnamese community, especially in the diaspora, we think a lot about the fall of Saigon. But I was working with a nonprofit, CIRAC, Southeast Asian Resource Action Center. They're based in DC. And the Center for Asian American Media, which sort of propels Asian American stories into public media. So sorry, this is a long-winded way to describe the anthology because I still haven't figured out how to talk about it very precisely. But basically last year we were like, we have to do something for 2025. How fast can we get this done? We don't want it to only be about Vietnamese people, but kind of look more broadly at the experience of Southeast Asian refugees who came to the US during that war, of which there are many and geographically really spread. So that's what the docuseries is about. And Threads is a part of that. And I would say this episode sort of introduces the Vietnam War, or what is known as the Vietnam War, but through the point of view of people who are often left out of the conversation. So within kind of the Kinh Viet community, I think we talk a lot about how South Vietnam was excluded, but then there's this other layer of how it's more complex than that. And there are people, indigenous people from the highlands, who also experience that war in very complex ways and are in the US for complex reasons. and I think that was just so Thread sort of introduces that piece into our larger docuseries about Southeast Asian American refugees.
Thank you, Quinn. And if you are interested in seeing the other two films in that anthology, they are both in the short film set, A Place at the Table. The titles are, and Quinn, you'll have to correct me on the pronunciation for one of them. It's not Teb Chaw, correct?
Yeah. It's They Chaw. It's which I also might be saying wrong. It's a Hmong word for land, and that episode was directed by Julie Grande. And then the other episode that's in Viet Film Fest is called The Market, which is directed by Wan Yingwen. We have two more, but it's not in Viet Film Fest this year. We just finished actually yesterday.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's why I'm stressed.
I hope to see them for Viet Film Fest 2026.
Yeah, we'll definitely submit.
All right, and Deepu, I have to ask you, your film changes animation styles multiple times during its brief runtime. What was your thought process about which style to use for which sequence?
Well, for The Boy Cheated Death, the main idea is that the world of the human characters is in 2D animation, which is something that is drawn and existing in the two-dimensional world. And when I hear Anne's shares about how the kids, the teenagers, the online world for them seems more real than the real world. I feel like there's a little bit of connection with how I tries to convey the idea that the protagonist, my film's protagonist, imagination is more palpable and more real to him than the world that he exists in, which is why I decided that his imagination has to be in stop motion and in the materials that are palpable, that feels more that feels more like you can touch it than the 2D drawings. And the idea is that his imagination is so strong and so vivid that it has power. And after that, we have this main idea. And so the question is, basically, we have to find different techniques to execute each sequence, because we have different animal characters, and our character travels through different worlds. So we have to make it feasible, because we have to follow the production schedule, and two, it has to convey the emotion that I intend. So for each sequence, I worked with references and mood boards to find the method and the style for each of them. So this is how I process with the sequences, and there has always been good surprise, sometimes bad surprises, but I was very fortunate because I got to work with the best team possible, so everything was okay.
Okay, thank you, Pipu. And for Alice, I wonder, when we look at films submitted to Viet Film Fest, linguistic anxiety usually is never depicted as comedic. Your film is very different in this regard. What about an individual's anxiousness and not knowing their quote unquote ancestral tongue struck you as inherently funny?
I think the anxiousness itself didn't strike as inherently funny to me, but since it's something that I did experience myself, and I did talk about it with my friends as well, just as my character is talking about it with her best friend, and that's how she copes with it. I found out that when talking about problems like that related to our to our ancestry and just in general how our heritage, it's easier to talk about it when you talk about it with people that can experience the same thing, and that for me also applies with being like queer and being a lesbian and talking about it with queer friends as well. So in my film, it came naturally to me that I wanted to make it funny and make a comedic film, because that's how I probably would cope myself with this issue that my character have. So I think I wanted to depict this as she calls her friend her best friend and wants to talk about something that is serious, but when talking about it with a friend, it's easier to then find answers if we can laugh about a shared problem, and uh, even if it's like hard. So I think that's why also um, I did envision like the possibility of my film being more of a documentary or like a serious tone. Like it was a question at the very beginning when I was writing it, but then I found it easier to talk about it, laughing about it, and making it maybe more accessible as well to people that could relate to a certain extent, because everyone goes through, even if it's not a language issue, but like trying to perform something that you aren't or you don't have the skill yet, and being, yeah, trying to overdo it sometimes, and being tempted to lie. So that's what I was also talking about. So I thought it was a good way talking about it through a funny date, lesbian date anecdote, for it to convey both messages and in a light-hearted way. So yeah, I think it might also be easier for younger audiences to relate to it if it's more accessible by its comedic, cartoony tone. So yeah, kind of an introduction to the subject.
Thank you, Alice. I wanted to point viewers to a few short film sets that they might like if you liked some of the films here. Alice and Pipu are again 2 of 10 animated short filmmakers this year. You can see most of the others in our short film set drawn to the screen. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Anne Nguyen's other film that was part of our festival as well. You can see her film, We Used to Take the Long Way Home, in the short film set, Where the Heart Settles. And now, as we come to the conclusion of our time here, we're going to go back to group questions. As you all know, many of the viewers for this set are students, middle school age and high school age, so ages about 12 to 17. Is there anything from your backgrounds or from your films themselves that you wished, any advice, any wisdom that you wanted to impart to them, beginning with Alice?
I think because I wasn't, me being high school, it was not that of a long time ago, since I'm just like a young adult finishing my studies. So I still feel close to this age and when it happened for me. And at the time, it was when every questioning about my identity came together, both being like trying to figure out my sexuality and also my ethnicity, and all of this came to my deep questioning when I was in high school and in my teen years. And because I know these ages is when whatever your identity is, you kind of have to investigate this about yourself to figure out who you really are, what and how you want to show yourself to the world. So even if my short film takes place in more of the characters are already young adults, I think it's very important to like what helped me is community, for both and all of my identities, is to reach out to people who experience the same things as me, and so both finding out more of a Vietnamese and Asian community, becoming friends with them, coming from a very white background. It didn't happen to me until more of my late teen years and early 20s. And yeah, I think it's very important to find people and stuff to relate to at this age, because you need identification, and I understand that so well. So I hope festivals like this can also help finding community in a way, because you feel seen in short films and films in general. And yeah, I hope this will help. And I think, yeah, finding ways to connect and finding the representation you need is very important. So yeah, this festival is already a first step.
People?
Yeah, I really agree with what Alice said. And I also think that, the students, you are so much more younger than I am. I'm now, and I think that in this, increasingly polarized world, it's important to remember that we are not binary. Our identity is so complex and so rich, and it has so many layers. And I know that it's tempting to try to find certain boxes to fit ourselves into. Maybe sometimes, we feel comfortable fitting some boxes, but we don't always have to feel obliged to stay inside this box, because we as humans, we're always growing. And as we listen to other people's story and sharing our story with other people, connecting with other people, and also watching the films and knowing that behind every films there are voices. The people that are telling, that they're making these films, they are also people with very different identities. I think that is just so interesting and so important.
And Quinn?
I resonate with what everyone's shared. So maybe something else that I think, reflecting on when I was also that age, I had a lot of questions about larger history, my own family history within it. And it felt like very anxiety ridden to be like, oh my God, there's so much I don't know. And maybe like guilt too around language as well, like not knowing things, not knowing how to speak as well, all of these things that I don't know where the guilt was inherited from, but I hope that you all give yourself grace and know that there's a lot of time. And I now like am also, I feel so far from when I was a teenager, and I look back and I'm so proud of myself when I was that age, even though when I was that age I felt like I was lacking so much. So I think if there's a way, and through all these, to learn your own history, and not the history you have to inherit, but the history that is what feels really like yours, I think that's a worthwhile journey. And I know that, especially in the diaspora, sometimes that's filled with guilt, anxiety, and questions about where you can find that. But that has really changed my life to kind of really go on this journey to find out things about the past. And I hope that you will do that too.
And Anne?
Yeah, kind of going along with what everyone said, I feel like, especially with what Queen said about giving yourself grace, I feel like when you're that age, everything is truly so intense. Like all your feelings, all your emotion. Like for me, when I was that age, I had this like insane like anger and just like I was such a misanthrope for no reason. I feel like no one understood me. I'm so special. But I feel like the one thing that I would say to myself back then is just like honestly follow your curiosity and to not be afraid to like, try or to really go for what piqued your interest. Like that is why I'm here today, because I just kind of, despite all my anger, all my sadness, I always love art and music and things, and just really find a healthy outlet for your feelings. And it doesn't have to be like all, box in. Yeah.
Thank you all for the advice that you've given to our student viewers. Very, 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 very briefly now, could we just go run down about future projects we have in the pipeline, beginning with Alice, very quickly?
It will be quick because I just graduated, so I don't have really a lot of project going on, mostly trying to find a job. But I would love to maybe give more life to my characters that I created for my graduation film. And I hope to maybe one day create an animated series because I did watch so many of them. It would be so great. Yeah, I wish.
Well, for me, I've started diving deep into making miniatures and miniature sets. So I'm developing a short film right now about a nail artist who is a Vietnamese refugee, and with all of her nail art coming to life. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Wow. I mentioned I'm finishing up a docu-series, and then I think after that I'm gonna chillax for a while. But knowing myself, I probably would love to do something more experimental, still documentary, but sort of explore the format a little bit more.
My other short called We Used to Take the Long Way Home is currently in the festival circuit. So I'm also developing that into a feature version. And at the same time, I'm in pre production for my next short, which will be called If I Were Your Boyfriend. Yeah. And yeah.
Right, and we hope to see some of those projects at future editions of Viet Film Fest. With my thanks to Alice Yervat, Pipu Phong Nguyen, Quinn Nguyen Lei, and Anne Nguyen, who are coming to us all from either Southern California or France. Thank you for watching. I wanted to note that Viet Film Fest at home continues through Sunday, October the 19th. So we encourage all of you to take a look at all of the films we have remaining on our virtual platform. But that is the end of this virtual Q&A of Let This Acceptance Take. Thank you again to the filmmakers. Thank you to our technical support, who just so happens to be today digital director Tony Nguyen. Again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you very soon. Bye, everybody.